That 1930s guy here in modern times, New York, or it used to be called modern times, as you can see. What is Brentwood today was once a utopian community. Now, what does that mean? Well, it was founded by a guy named Josiah Warren, and he was an idealist. He wanted to create a community of free love, no regular monetary system. People would pay for your time through time credits. Very interesting. I'll discuss that in a little bit. And basically there's no marriage. You can have 10 wives, you can have no wives. They're not even wives. It was a radical idea. And there was a lot of these radical communities in that started in the 1840s in England and the United States. This came a little later. This was like one of the last ones. It was 1851 that Warren founded the community. And there was once New Harmony, Oneida, other ones in the United States. Many of them didn't last long. Many of them were, by the time their founders went on to other things or passed away, usually it didn't last past the founders. They were kind of the driving force, and it was difficult to maintain. But there was a lot of radical ideas coming out in the 1840s. You had the revolutions all over Europe in 1848. The Communist Manifesto was released. You had the Chartists in England having the biggest mass protests up to that time. Thousands of people marched on London, demanding fairer treatment of workers and laborers. And here in America, that radical idealism came here to Brentwood. And I'm also going to connect this to the 1930s, since this 1850s are not very close to the 1930s. There was an interesting story about chicken farms. Yes, chicken farms. Brentwood was going to supply New York City with chickens, and we're going to talk about that. Now, there are some beautiful old houses in Brentwood, and beautiful trees as well. And a lot of this was due to the special character of the creation of modern times. The streets were lined out in perfect sections by Josiah Warren and a certain Mr. Pearl, who also helped contribute to the building of the town. He had a vision. Now, Josiah Warren, he was decently old by this time. He was born in 1798, and he was what they called a positivist. And a positivist was the self-proclaimed religion of humanity. And I wouldn't say they were quite atheist. They were more like an agnostic type. They believed in the sacredness of humanity itself, but not necessarily a definable God. And most people wouldn't think that all the way back in the 1850s. But like I said, the 1850s was a time of new ideas throughout the world. And modern times, although it didn't last that long, it was a profound experiment. They had a thing called a Times store, which was a general store, but instead of cash, people paid in labor time. The time that it took people to help you in the store was written down in a public ledger anyone could see, and they made out notes, and I'll show one of them shortly, where you were given 1 hour of time, meaning that they could owe you 1 hour of labor, There was also corn was used as a popular medium of exchange, but this was part of the utopian concept. And these white pines are all over the place in Brentwood. They're really nice trees. Some of them were planted with modern times, others were real estate developers later on. But it really adds a special character to the town. Modern times kind of faded out. 1864. By 1864, they changed the name to Brentwood officially. But, part of the reason was, the people with the founding principles didn't make up much of the town anymore. It was a pretty radical idea. It was hard to really get adherence in the 1850s and be socially accepted. So the movement just kind of dissipated over time. There was no big moment that ended it. The Panic of 1857 helped because it destroyed the finances of the country and made it more difficult to run their operations here. And then the Civil War, of course, came in 1861, and that completely disrupted society everywhere in the country. So that was kind of the death moment, but there was no precise moment where modern times suddenly stopped and Brentwood began. Sure, the name changed, but there was no like ideological, no more of this positivism anymore moment. I'm now at the 1859 William Dame House in Brentwood, which is just a little bit down from where I was before. This was actually where the first big well was dug for water, so this is a very popular social gathering place for the revolutionary thinkers in modern times. And as you can see, the kind of strange octagonal shape, that was actually a trend in the 1850s. There was, you'll find different pockets of places around the country where you see this kind of construction. It didn't last very long. I don't know because it didn't look good, but the idea was because they wanted to maximize space. That was the reason for building that strange shape. But like I said, this time period was a time of new ideas. Revolutionary time in the mid 19th century. Lots of new concepts being tried, and Brentwood is just a great example of it. Here's an old fire truck from Brentwood. May just be woods now. But in 1877, there's another interesting story about Brentwood that many people do not know. That's probably just as interesting as the modern times experiment. In this patch of woods here, there was a resident named Charles Codman, and he had a strange dream that an owl came flying to his window, shrugged off some snow, and told him that there was bones in his backyard from an ancient Indian, I think it was 1,000 moons ago, who was improperly buried, and to take it to a certain location and bury it there. So this was the red owl speaking to him, and this legend became pretty famous, and it is now, the red owl is the unofficial, or maybe official, symbol of Brentwood because of Charles Codman's dream and his moving of the bones. And who knows? Maybe that owl really did come. This quaint little deli pizzeria in downtown Brentwood used to be the Brentwood train station, believe it or not. Now they had the one they used in the 19th century, burnt down in 1903, and they built a new one. And in 1987, for some reason, they switched it to the other side of Brentwood Road, which is the main thoroughfare, cuts across the town, and they built a modern train station. It's not really any bigger, it's just newer. And the platforms was probably, they were able to build a platform longer. That's probably the reason why. But anyway, I mean, you can see this doesn't look like a normal pizzeria. You can see the train station aura that comes out of this shape of the building. But anyway, into the 20th century now. The red owl's long gone. Modern times is just a memory. But Brentwood grew very much as a suburban community. It developed very nicely, and they built a huge medical establishment, Pilgrim State Hospital, which is very small today. It's still there. I did a video concerning that earlier, so I won't go into that. But anyway, Brentwood, with their substantial growth, during the Great Depression, there was an interesting episode where a real estate developer who had been working in Brentwood real estate, or Suffolk County real estate in general, and he had the idea to make chicken farms out here. And why chicken farms? Well, in 1933, the height of the unemployment during the Great Depression, about 25% unemployment, there was people saying that maybe we should go back to the old farm life. And there were just too many people living in the city, even though there was farm surpluses, which really didn't, make too much sense. But I think they were more along the lines they needed subsistence farming to come back in order to solve the massive employment problem in Brentwood, in the country. And so this guy, I don't know how he came up with the idea, but he started advertising for people to move to Brentwood and start a chicken farm for an investment with a minimum amount, I believe was $970 down payment. But if you put this down payment, they give you the land, they give you a house, they give you instructions on how to raise chickens. So anyone could do it. You don't have to be a knowledgeable farmer to do this project. I'm trying to see, $920, sorry, was the minimum. And they would guide you on a new technique, they said, that could grow 2 to 4 pound chickens in just a matter of a few months, less than a few months, or maybe. But and I don't know how many people were attracted to this site. They advertised it incessantly in the New York papers throughout the summer of 1933. The earliest I could find was May 20th. The latest, September 16th, I believe. And then they stopped abruptly, and you didn't see any more all of a sudden. So I don't think it ever really took off. But Richard Cowan, had the idea that New York City would rather have fresh chickens from Long Island, which are cheaper, possibly price, than the current supply that they're getting from New York City. I mean, from the Midwest, which was more expensive had to travel longer, so it wasn't as fresh. And with so many people out of work, they were looking for cheap meat. You know, beef was more expensive, pork was more expensive. Actually, it was still pretty cheap because of the surpluses, but it was an idea. And I don't think it lasted long. And then another article appears, I found later in 1935, April 1935, where two people were suing Richard Cowan and his company, the Eastland Poultry Colony was called, for not fulfilling their promises. They each put down down payments of over $1,000, and apparently he didn't give them the advice and guidance that was promised to them. So they actually settled out of court. One settled for just $150, the other one $450, I believe, and that was the last you heard of that. So this guy might have been a swindler, not sure. His name, he was a real estate developer for a long time, but he was involved in another lawsuit I found in 1961 where Suffolk County was accusing him of selling county lands that he was not allowed to have, but they dropped the suit because of lack of evidence. So, and then there was another mention in the paper in the 70s where he owned papers at Crooked Hill Road, which was a kind of a hilly road, and I guess kids were getting in a lot of bicycle accidents, and they were urging him to put fences up, but all he did was put up no trespass signs instead. So I don't know, he might have been kind of a shady character. But it was an interesting episode. This Brentwood almost became the chicken center of New York, but it didn't. But it's an interesting story nonetheless. And I'll end today's journey appropriately at the Brentwood Public Library, established 1937. So we got the 1930s, one more in Brentwood history here. But today, the main point I wanted to show was the interesting history that most people don't know about the town of Brentwood. You know, besides modern times, you have the Red Owl and the chicken farms. It's just a town with a unique history, to be sure, in the area. So it's definitely worth looking into if you're more interested in reading about modern times. There is a book about the history of Brentwood, written by Verne Dwyer. It was in the 50s, but it goes over all the it doesn't mention the chicken colonies, but that was my story I dug up. But they do mention the story of the founding of modern times and the ideas that they had, and as well as the interesting Red Owl tale. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more exciting 1930s.